Many would say the Attitude Era is the greatest era in WWE history, and it's easy to see why some people would say that. It was a time when the WWF completely switched their content style to what Vince McMahon called something a bit more contemporary, but I think it went beyond contemporary and into the realm of complete and utter craziness, especially when you compare it to the New Generation era. The Attitude Era created not only new superstars, but absolute megastars who are now considered legends of the business. It literally created millions of new fans as people began watching wrestling for the very first time during the era. And it made pro wrestling a lot more mainstream as the WWE presented storylines, promos and matches tailored towards the young male demographic. A demographic who wanted something a bit more than a big bald dude dressed in yellow telling them to eat their vitamins and say their prayers. I'm a big fan of the Attitude Era, and right now I've almost watched the whole thing in its entirety for a second time through my Reliving the War series. I do consider myself very qualified to speak on this era because I've actually lived it all again, in real time, week by week, for the past 5 years. So let me tell you something, brothers, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. You saw the video title for this episode of Atrocity. I'm going to be looking at some of the worst moments and general themes of the Attitude Era, but I also need you to know that this is all being covered through the eyes of someone watching it all again in modern times. I'm not going to sit here and say the WWE shouldn't have done this or they shouldn't have done that when society, culture and politics were so much different back then. So believe me when I say, yes, I know things that aren't acceptable now were more, well, not acceptable then, but maybe easier to present back then. You don't need to get on your soapbox for this one because, trust me, we all know most of this stuff wouldn't fly today. As time goes on, it's harder for modern fans to truly understand how popular the Road Warriors were during their heyday. So popular were Hawk and Animal that promotions tried to come up with their own Road Warrior knockoff tag teams because everyone wanted these boys competing on their shows. The phrase Road Warrior Pop tells you all you need to know. Hawk and Animal returned to the WWF in early 1997 after another brief stint in WCW, and they were booked terribly. Things started off alright, but as the year went on and when LOD faced teams like the Godwins, Owen and Bulldog, the Nation and the Outlaws, the boys looked pretty bad in regards to the way their matches played out and how their finishes were written. I remember calling all this out week by week when watching again for Reliving the War. An LOD revival was then attempted in 1998, and at first it seemed to work. LOD 2000 had a brand new look, a new manager that in fairness didn't stay around for too long, and when the WWF didn't know what to do with LOD once again, they decided to turn Road Warrior Hawk's real life demons into a storyline. Hawk was presented on TV as a drunk, a clumsy alcoholic who was living in total denial, and the WWF tried to make this as real as possible by doing little things that painted a bigger picture. For example, they had matches cancelled after the LOD made their entrance, they had Hawk seemingly getting back on the right track only for him to fall off the rails again, and they had Road Warrior Animal showing a real lack of sympathy for his friend and tag team partner. It came to a head when Hawk climbed up the Titantron and threatened to jump off. He claimed no one cared about him and he was upset that Darren Drozdov was seemingly replacing him in the LOD tag team. Darren would climb up too, it looked like he wanted to help Hawk, but he ended up pushing him off, and the vast majority of fans obviously found this very distasteful. Having storylines centered around these kinds of things is bad enough, but when Hawk was actually battling problems related to alcohol in his real life, it made it all worse. The character of Beaver Cleavage was bizarre. Former headbanger Mosh, real name Chaz Warrington, recorded a few vignettes where he played the role of an overgrown child living at home with his mother. These vignettes were a parody of an old American television series named Leave It to Beaver that featured the character Beaver Cleaver. But things got incredibly weird when Beaver Cleavage, the character Chaz was playing, seemed to really like the company of his own mother. He would make innuendo-laced jokes about his mom's looks and her body shape. He would break the fourth wall to tell these jokes, and for some reason or another, the WWE, or rather Vince Russo, thought this would be very funny. Here's what Russo said about the character and vignettes. A mother and son exchanging innuendos isn't the norm, but if you really thought about it, if mom and son were indeed having an inappropriate relationship, you think they would let the world know? Absolutely not. It would be done in secret behind closed doors in the middle of the night, not over breakfast. So in the wrestling world, this would be known as Beaver Cleavage and Mrs. Cleavage working the audience. Don't tell me you actually thought they were mother and son. Really? Bro, they were the same freaking age. There was zero maternal connection. None. This was all a ploy. They wanted you to believe there was a taboo relationship going on. So as heels, they could use this to their advantage to gain the upper hand at the right place at the right time against an innocent babyface. Yes, just like Goldust played on the fear of others, another brilliant characteristic that some wrestling fans still don't get. Yep, it was quickly revealed that Mrs. Cleavage wasn't actually Beaver's mom. Chaz just decided he didn't want to do this anymore, and that part of the angle was wrapped up, likely due to complaints or just because it was so damn weird. It then got really dark when it appeared that Chaz was actually physically hurting Mariana when she showed up to TV with her face all messed up. And in storyline, Chaz was shunned by the locker room and cops were called to arrest him. But it turned out Mariana was actually lying. McMahon seemed to have this thing about painting attractive women as liars, and you may think this is some sort of recency bias that makes me say this, but then we look at the next Attitude Era moment that happened just before Beaver Cleavage, and this concerns Terry Runnels lying about a miscarriage. So Terry began a relationship with Val Venus and she said she was pregnant with Venus's child. Val dumped her. Terry would then form an alliance with Jackie known as the Pretty Mean Sisters, and these ladies would end up forming an alliance with Mark Henry and D'Lo Brown. Well, D'Lo was friendly with Mark Henry and Mark Henry was very, very friendly with Jackie and Terry. On the first Raw of 1999, Terry fell from the steps when approached by D'Lo, and this would lead to Terry apparently miscarrying. D'Lo felt extremely guilty, and in the weeks that followed, he would do anything Terry told him to just so he could try to make things right. But D'Lo then found out that Terry had been lying all along, and Mrs. Runnels was actually never pregnant to begin with. So not only did the storyline centre around a woman lying about something very real and something very serious, but it also featured a storyline that could hit home for a lot of viewers in a very negative way. The Warzone got turned into a bad episode of Jerry Springer, and even the most defiant Attitude Era fans would admit that this whole thing was pretty awful. A storyline that was never ever going to turn out to be good because there's nothing redeemable about it at all. While we're on the subject of Terry and Mariana, it would probably be the right time to mention how women were booked in general during this era, or rather how they were used on TV, because booking makes it sound like there was some sort of thought put into it all. Eye candy was a big part of the Attitude Era, and as mentioned at the top of the video, times were very different. It wasn't only the WWF who sexualized women on their TV shows, and it wasn't even only pro wrestling who took this approach when presenting women on TV. But there's also this misconception that women's wrestling wasn't featured because there was a lack of women who could actually work in the ring, like somehow the ladies only got good in modern times. This is very wrong. There were good female performers in the United States. The WWF had the likes of Jackie and Ivory. Women's wrestling was popular in Japan for a very long time, and even WCW had presented women's wrestling in a manner that made people stop and say, holy shit, these girls can actually go. The WWF during the Attitude Era sexualized women, and it really all started with Sunny, but it got out of control when Sable got over in a big way. The pop Sable would get just for walking to the ring and waving to the fans was pretty unbelievable, and the WWF took full advantage of this by showcasing Sable on a weekly basis. They tried putting her in the ring, she wasn't very good, but fans didn't care and the WWF knew this. When Sable packed her bags, the WWF tried to find a suitable replacement. Tori, who could actually wrestle a little, was getting ready to show a more sexy side to her character, but this ended up getting dropped. A kayfabe EMT known as BB was then put in the spotlight, but she didn't last long either. And then you had everyone in between, such as Terry, Deborah, Miss Kitty, and the rest. It wasn't all bad though. Chyna was booked pretty well, which people seem to conveniently forget when talking about women during the Attitude Era. Jackie also had a few opportunities to show what she could do in the ring, although to be fair, these opportunities were few and far between. Ivory was good, but again, she didn't get much TV time. And Tori, at first, was also presented as more of a wrestler and not a model, although this went to the wayside as time went on. There was a small shift when Trish Stratus and Lita began their rivalry, though Trish was made to literally bark like a dog for Vince McMahon. Trish has said she had no problem with this because she knew her retribution would come, but that doesn't mean it still wasn't a terrible promo. Again, there's no moral grandstanding here. After living through it all then and again now, I appreciate how times have changed, but you are living on another planet if you can't see and appreciate how far both the women and the WWE have come when it comes to presenting women's wrestling on TV. If you still want to get your rocks off while watching pro wrestling while you have a working internet connection, then you probably need to reevaluate a few things. On the flip side, back then, the WWF knew the crowd ate up everything they were doing with the women, so it's no surprise that this kind of stuff kept going way beyond the Attitude Era. It's a promo that splits fans when you do some research. Some see it as highly offensive, others will say it's comedy and acceptable back in the late 90s. Whatever the case, D-Generation X cut a promo while dressed up as the Nation, and the boys decided they needed to paint their faces to make it a bit more, I don't know. I legit don't know why this was needed, because think about it. The Rock's one of the easiest wrestlers to imitate, what with all his catchphrases and the eyebrow raising and all that stuff. Godfather's a pimp, so that should be easy. Mark Henry's one of the biggest dudes on the roster. I mean, we've got characteristics we could work with here beyond skin colour. X-Pac stated that this is the one thing in his career that he genuinely regrets. D'Lo stated that he wished this parody could have been done without skin colour being a factor. And look, I know for a fact you're going to think about this one way or another, and whatever I say is going to annoy a fair portion of viewers, but I'm going to be honest. I didn't understand back then how offensive this was, and when I was a dumb kid, I thought it was funny. If your outlook on things doesn't change over the span of 25 years, then you might be a wee bit stuck in your old ways. Now, to me, it comes across as unnecessary and kinda shocking. But in saying that too, there's people out there who'll be offended that I'm even speaking about this because it doesn't directly relate to me. I can only speak as a viewer, as someone who watched it then and someone who watched it all play out very recently, both before, during and after the promo. And I can say without question that this promo didn't add a thing to the DX versus Nation rivalry except for a few cheap laughs. It was basically DX trying to be edgy, but in the long run, it did cause a lot of regret. I'm sure every member of DX, not just X-Pac, wishes this was erased from existence, and indeed, the WWE tried to do just that when they removed this segment from their WWE Network version of Raw. That shows us that it's something the whole company wished had never happened. From here, I want to talk about creative and booking decisions that I found to be questionable during the Attitude Era, and not so much things that are now seen as problematic in today's world. The first thing I'm going to bring up is the rivalry featuring Stone Cold Steve Austin and The Undertaker. I know what you're thinking, how dare you say anything negative about these two absolute legends of pro wrestling, and yeah, I agree, they are legends and they should be held in very high regard. But I was seriously surprised by how much of the main event scene of the Attitude Era, particularly in 1998, was eaten up by this feud. What's more, I don't think these two ever had a great match together. Decent matches, absolutely, but they also had some stinkers in my opinion, including the Buried Alive match at In Your House Rock Bottom. I am genuinely baffled by folks who say this match was good, and I actually think people haven't sat through the match when they say that. When Austin won the WWF belt at Mania 14, he moved into a feud with Dude Love. At first I wasn't keen on this, but I was totally won over by their match at Over the Edge 98. From here, The Undertaker announced that he wanted his chance at the WWF title, and what we got was a drawn out story based on The Undertaker potentially turning heel and potentially joining forces with his little brother Kane. Many also say The Undertaker vs Kane story is the greatest pro wrestling story ever written, and I challenge these people to look at the WWF from June 98 to December 98 and try to say that this was all great, because at times it felt like the story was dragging on, and the fact that The Undertaker wouldn't confirm nor deny his newfound relationship actually got a bit tedious, in my opinion. It felt at times that the WWF didn't know what to do, and even when Kane and Taker officially joined forces, the company then booked them in matches against each other mere weeks later. I think SummerSlam 98 should have been the big culmination of the Austin vs Undertaker feud. The few weeks leading up to that match were pretty good, and the whole Highway to Hell thing made the main event feel bigger than what it was. But then Austin got knocked out moments into the match, and after a really good start where Stone Cold showcased more of his technical abilities, the bout turned into Stone Cold just trying to get through it without any major mishaps. To his credit, he did get through it and it was still a decent bout, but it could have been so much more. The inclusion of the Austin vs Undertaker rivalry's a bit more of a personal take, and seeing his business was seriously booming around this time period, I know I'm in the minority here, but please, before you go mental at me, try watching it all again with those rose-tinted glasses off. You may find yourself getting a bit exhausted by the end of 1998. I've no problems at all with long rivalries. As a matter of fact, I much prefer them. But the creative has to be really on point to pull it off well, and I don't think much thought was really put into this one. The numbers were good, so the WWF didn't feel like they had to change much. I firmly believe that the WWF had a big star on their hands with Andrew Martin, and you could have swore that this dude was going to go on to bigger and better things. During a time when the WWF were doing a much better job at pushing newer, younger talent in comparison to their competition over at WCW, Big Test joined the WWF in one of the best ways possible. He was launched as a heel in Vince McMahon's corporation faction. He had a great look, he had some great speed and agility for a guy his size, and while it was easy to compare Test with Kevin Nash based on his long hair, his size and choice of wrestling attire, he didn't really care for Nash & Company's philosophy of working smart and not hard. Test could go in the ring. When he left the corporation and after Vince McMahon revealed himself to be the Ministry of Darkness Greater Power, Test was put in a big storyline where he'd get engaged to Vince's daughter Stephanie. And yeah, while some of these segments made you want to puke, what was important here is that Test was now getting featured in a very prominent storyline. Shane McMahon didn't want his sister to marry this big long-haired punk, which led to a match between Shane and Test at SummerSlam 99, and the crowd went crazy for Test during this bout. If the WWF and Vince McMahon truly listened to their fans, then this should have been more than enough to set Test up for a brighter future after this storyline wrapped up, only it wrapped up in the worst way possible for Andrew. Triple H actually got married to Steph. This was a big ploy by Little Miss McMahon and Hunter, and effectively it was a way for Stephanie to get back at Vince for how he treated her during the whole Ministry of Darkness fiasco. Instead of Test getting payback as a sympathetic babyface, he was absolutely destroyed by Triple H and D-Generation X. It's weird because it all seems so obvious and so easy. Test versus Triple H seemed like the next logical step, and having Test getting his payback against Hunter wouldn't have hurt the game a single bit, seeing as he was already at the very top of the company. But Test instead got embarrassed week after week, with the WWF only throwing him a bone maybe once or twice before it was all forgotten about. Test would then turn heel. He formed a tag team with Albert. Stephanie and Hunter ruled over the WWF with an iron fist, and Test never did make it to the main event scene. People tend to rag on Brawl for All, but I've mentioned a few times now that I actually didn't mind it because I like watching people fight. I know the argument here is to watch MMA or boxing if I want to see legit fights, but I thought watching these wrestlers trying to prove they were legit tough guys was pretty entertaining. The injuries sustained and the careers that were altered does make Brawl for All a bad idea on the grand scheme of things though, and possibly the biggest casualty of the whole tournament happened to the Brawl for All winner, Bart Gunn. Everyone thought Steve Williams was going to win this thing, from Jim Ross, Vince McMahon to Steve himself. The WWF had plans for Dr. Death to feud with Steve Austin after he won Brawl for All, but Bart Gunn said, nah mate, not happening. Bart Gunn turned out to be tougher than everyone, and not only did he knock Steve Williams out, but he also knocked Bradshaw out in the finals, which you'd think would put Bart in a good position moving forward. Did Bart Gunn get put into that rivalry with Stone Cold? No. Did Bart Gunn get booked in main event matches? No. Did Bart Gunn even compete on TV immediately after the tournament? No. The final of the Brawl for All happened on the 24th of August 1998 episode of Raw, and Bart didn't compete again on WWF television until the 16th of February 1999, and that's because the WWF began booking him again in preparation for another Brawl for All match at WrestleMania 15. He was gonna face Butterbean, a professional boxer who knocked Bart out in 35 seconds. Bart didn't get booked in the WWF again. He returned to Japan where he became a mainstay for all Japan. And basically, Bart was treated this way because he messed with the WWF's plans for Dr. Death. No one thought Bart was going to win Brawl for All, and when he did his job to the best of his ability, he got punished for it. So it's another case of the WWF cutting their nose off to spite their face. What's sad about it all is that the company didn't even try with Bart Gunn. They went from giving this guy his prize fight money to immediately making him look bad. You know how many times the WWF title changed hands throughout 1996 and 1997? 8 times in 2 years. A wee bit excessive, you might think. But then you look at 98 and 99 and you realise the belt changed hands a total of 16 times, and yeah, 96-97 suddenly doesn't seem all that bad. Title changes became very frequent when the Attitude Era kicked off, though one could argue that these were necessary due to the WWF's mission of building new main event stars. Guys like The Rock and Mick Foley winning the championship did a whole lot to create lasting Attitude Era memories that we still talk about today. And on top of that, the title changing hands so much also lent itself to the feeling that anything could happen on any given night. Is it a bad thing for viewers? I'd say no, it isn't. The spontaneous nature of some title changes made WWF TV feel a bit more exciting back then. But when it comes to legacy and what it actually meant to be a champion, it does kinda water things down. Think of it this way, it took Hulk Hogan and Bret Hart their entire WWF careers to win the championship a total of 5 times respectively. The Rock, meanwhile, won the WWF title a total of 6 times during the Attitude Era alone. You could think about this either way really, and it really depends if you think the WWF belt actually holds significance or if you look at it more like a prop. Some people like lots of title changes for the unexpected excitement it brings, while others like longer, more traditional reigns. It just depends on what you prefer. I'll wrap it up with what I think is the worst thing that ever happened during the Attitude Era, and that was the return of the Blue Blazer and the death of Owen Hart. What's so sad about this whole thing is that it really shouldn't have happened, both from the safety of Owen's harness to the fact that he was portraying the Blue Blazer character. Like, if the WWF didn't have the stupid idea of bringing the Blue Blazer back in the first place, then Owen wouldn't have had to do the entrance stunt at Over the Edge 99. There were moments here and there where Owen tried to make the most out of the Blue Blazer character coming back. There's one Raw in particular where he sits on commentary and he's really funny when denying that he is in fact the Blue Blazer. Owen's subtle humour and his overall timing was on point, and he really did try to make something out of this whole fiasco that supposedly came about because he refused to do a more risque storyline that involved Deborah McMichael. But then all this doesn't matter when Owen passed away on a live pay-per-view. It's one of the darkest days in all of pro wrestling. It was bad watching it all unfold then, and it's still terrible to sit through again. To have anyone die over a silly wrestling entrance is beyond words, and we really lost one of the greats that night at Over the Edge. So you're maybe wondering why I left out Mae Young giving birth to a hand, and why did I leave out Kaientai playing with their swords? Well, first of all, did anyone actually watch the build up to the whole Mae Young thing? Yeah, Mae giving birth to a hand was weird, for lack of a better word, but the Mark Henry and Mae Young relationship was hilarious in the weeks leading up to this. Mae and Mark going on dates, Mark buying Mae some questionable gifts and Mae doing the same for Mark. It's kinda annoying that the stuff they did before the whole hand thing just gets written off, so I spared it from a spot in this video because I thought the vast majority of their stuff beforehand was funny. Same for Val Venus and Kaientai. Choppy your PP is some funny shit, guys. Get a sense of humour. I'm amazed at how many people clutch pearls over this when it was all presented in a very tongue-in-cheek manner. I do agree it was a dumb way for the WWF to have John Wayne Bobbitt on the show. I mean, I don't even know why the WWF wanted to get this dude on their TV show to begin with, but I guess we can do what we always do and point to Vince Russo. Yeah, Val saving his pecker due to shrinkage is so stupid that I can't get mad at it. Preposterous, yes, but in a goofy way. What did I leave out that you thought should have been included? Jeff Jarrett becoming a massive misogynist, the Meat character, the Union stable maybe, the poor booking of the light heavyweight division, excessive violence, maybe you didn't like that, not enough graps every Monday night and too many promos perhaps? Let me know in the comments. Attitude without apology is a WWE atrocity, and I'll see you all in the next one. Please take care.